It was supposed to be a routine trip, nothing out of the ordinary. I'd gone out of town for a client presentation, just like I had countless times before. As I packed my bag and kissed Clara goodbye, I thought everything was fine. We'd had a small argument earlier in the week, something trivial about chores, but we brushed it aside like we always did. After 10 years of marriage, I thought we were solid, unshakable even. But that illusion was shattered the moment I walked through my front door. The client meeting wrapped up earlier than expected, so I decided to surprise Clara by coming home a day ahead of schedule. It was a small gesture, one I thought she'd appreciate. I imagined her smiling, her arms wrapping around me as she laughed about how I'd caught her off guard. Instead, what I walked into was a nightmare. As I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was a car I didn't recognize, a sleek black sedan parked out front. My stomach churned. Maybe it was one of her friends. Clara loved hosting book club meetings and impromptu wine nights. But something about the car felt off. It was too polished, too expensive for her usual crowd. I shook off the unease and entered the house quietly, hoping to surprise her. The lights were dim, and the faint sound of music drifted from the living room. I stepped inside, dropping my bag by the door. That's when I heard it, laughter. Deep, masculine laughter. My chest tightened as I moved closer, each step feeling heavier than the last. Peeking around the corner, I saw her. Clara, my wife of a decade, sitting on the couch with another man. Her laughter was carefree, her hand resting on his knee. His arm was draped over her shoulders, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a friend or a neighbor. This was something else entirely. Clara? My voice came out sharp, cutting through the cozy scene they created. Her head snapped around, her eyes wide with shock. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, and far too comfortable in my home, smirked as if he'd been expecting me. Clara scrambled to her feet, her face flushing with a mix of guilt and panic. "Ryan, what are you doing home?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my eyes darting between her and the stranger. "Who is this?" The man didn't bother introducing himself. Instead, he leaned back on the couch, completely unbothered, and said, "Looks like the husband's home early." Clara's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum. "I'm waiting," I said, my voice cold and steady. "It's not what it looks like," Clara finally managed, taking a hesitant step toward me. "Really?" I shot back, my anger flaring. "Because it looks like my wife is cozying up to another man in my living room." "Explain that to me, Clara." She opened her mouth to respond, but the man cut her off. "Relax, buddy. No need to get all worked up." My fists clenched at his dismissive tone. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, taking a step closer. Before he could answer, Clara grabbed my arm. "Ryan, please, let's talk about this." "Talk about what?" I snapped, pulling away from her. "About how you're cheating on me. About how you brought another man into our home. What part of this do you think can be explained away?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. The pain, the betrayal, it was too much. The man finally stood, towering over me with a smug grin. "You should calm down," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We wouldn't want things to get messy." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was calculated. Planned. They weren't caught off guard by my return. They'd been prepared for it. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What the hell is this?" Clara looked away, guilt etched across her face. The man stepped closer, his grin fading into something colder, more dangerous. "Why don't you take a seat, Ryan?" he said, gesturing to the couch. "We have a lot to discuss." I didn't move. My instincts screamed at me to get out, to call the police, to do something. But before I could react, I felt a sharp blow to the back of my head. Pain exploded in my skull, and the room spun. My knees buckled, and I hit the floor hard, the world around me fading into darkness. When I came to, I was lying on the guest bed, my wrists and ankles bound tightly with rope. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry, but I could make out the dim glow of the TV at the foot of the bed. A recording of Clara and the man played on the screen, their voices laughing, taunting me. I tried to move, but the ropes dug into my skin, cutting off circulation. "Ryan, if you're awake, welcome to the show," Clara's voice purred from the screen. "I hope you're comfortable because you're going to be here for a while." The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just infidelity. This was humiliation. They wanted to break me, to strip away everything I had left. But as I lay there, blood trickling down my temple, a new emotion began to take root. Anger. Pure, unrelenting anger. They thought they had me. They thought I was powerless. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. When I regained full awareness, the pain in my head was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. Betrayal, humiliation, anger. They all churned inside me like a raging storm. The dim light from the TV cast flickering shadows across the room, its cruel recording playing over and over. Clara and her accomplice, mocking me, tearing apart the life I thought I had. My wrists burned from the ropes, the coarse fibers cutting into my skin as I struggled against them. The knots were tight, but I wasn't about to give up. I had to focus, to stay calm. I couldn't let them win. Every ounce of me screamed for vengeance, but first, I needed to get free. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on the nightstand beside the bed. On it was a lamp, a small clock, and, most importantly, the jagged edge of a broken picture frame. It was a stretch, but it was my only shot. Twisting my body, I managed to shift closer, inch by agonizing inch. My legs strained against the ropes as I reached for the shard of glass. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I grasped it between my fingers. I worked at the ropes, sawing through them as quickly as I could without making too much noise. My hands trembled, both from the effort and the adrenaline surging through me. The knot around my wrist gave way first, and I nearly cried out in relief. Then I freed my ankles, wincing as blood rushed back to my numb limbs. I was free, but I couldn't afford to celebrate. Not yet. My next move had to be calculated. I couldn't just storm out of the room. They were likely nearby, waiting for me to wake up. I needed to gather my strength and figure out what I was dealing with. The recording on the TV gave me my first clue. Clara's voice rang out, sharp and biting. "This is what he deserves," she said, her tone dripping with contempt. All those years he thought he could control me, that he could take me for granted. The man laughed, a deep, sinister sound. "And now, he's powerless. Just like we planned." Their words were like daggers, each one slicing deeper than the last. Control her? Take her for granted? I had done nothing but love Clara, support her, and build a life with her. And this was how she repaid me? By conspiring with another man to destroy me? I grabbed the remote from the nightstand and paused the video, my hands shaking with rage. Then I noticed something else, a small USB drive plugged into the side of the TV. My heart raced. If this was their insurance, it might hold the key to their entire scheme. I pulled it out and slipped it into my pocket, vowing to examine its contents as soon as I had the chance. But first, I needed to get out of the house. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against it, straining to hear any signs of movement. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Taking a deep breath, I turned the doorknob as quietly as possible and stepped into the hallway. The dim lighting worked to my advantage, casting long shadows that concealed my movements. My first priority was finding my phone. If I could call for help, I'd have a fighting chance. I made my way to the living room, where I'd last had it, my heart pounding with every step. When I reached the living room, I froze. Clara and the man, Greg, I remembered her calling him, were sitting on the couch, their backs to me. They were deep in conversation, their voices low but heated. "I told you this was too risky," Clara hissed. "What if he gets loose?" "He won't," Greg replied, his tone dismissive. "You saw how out of it he was. He's not going anywhere." Clara let out a frustrated sigh. "I just want this to be over. I can't stand the sight of him anymore." Their words fueled the fire inside me. They thought they'd won, that I was broken. But they had no idea what was coming. I spotted my phone on the kitchen counter, just a few feet away from them. Steeling myself, I crept forward, staying low and keeping to the shadows. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached for the phone, my fingers closing around it just as Clara turned her head. "Ryan?" she gasped, her eyes widening in shock. Before she could react, I bolted for the door, adrenaline propelling me forward. Greg shouted something, but I didn't stop to listen. I threw open the door and ran into the night, the cool air stinging my face as I sprinted down the street. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps pounding against the pavement. Greg was chasing me, his heavy breaths growing louder with each passing second. My ankle throbbed with every step, but I didn't dare slow down. I turned a corner and ducked into a narrow alley, pressing myself against the wall as Greg thundered past. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I couldn't go back home, not yet. I needed a plan. I dialed the only person I could trust, my best friend, Nate. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but concerned. "Ryan? What's going on?" "Nate," I panted, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Greg wasn't coming back. "I need your help. It's Clara. She's not who I thought she was." "What do you mean?" he asked, the urgency in his voice cutting through his exhaustion. "She's been lying to me, conspiring with someone to ruin my life. I have proof, but I need a place to stay. I can't go back home." Nate didn't hesitate. "Come over. We'll figure this out." Relief washed over me. Nate had always been my rock, the one person who would stand by me no matter what. I ended the call and made my way to his apartment, sticking to the shadows and avoiding main roads. When I arrived, Nate opened the door and pulled me into a tight hug. "Jesus, Ryan, you look like hell," he said, his eyes scanning the bruises on my face and the cuts on my wrists. "You don't know the half of it," I muttered, stepping inside. As I recounted everything, the betrayal, the video, the USB drive, Nate's expression shifted from shock to anger. "She did all that? And this Greg guy, who the hell is he?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out. And when I do, they're going to regret ever crossing me." Nate nodded, his jaw clenched. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you." I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and held it up. "It starts with this. Let's see what they've been hiding." We plugged the drive into Nate's laptop, and a folder titled Evidence popped up on the screen. Inside were dozens of files, emails, videos, financial documents, all detailing Clara and Greg's plans. They'd been plotting this for months, maybe even years. They'd embezzled money from our joint accounts, staged fake transactions, and even falsified evidence to make it look like I was the one cheating. But the most damning file of all was a recording of Clara and Greg discussing their endgame. "Once we sell the house, we'll split the money and disappear," Greg said. "He'll be left with nothing." Clara laughed. "Serves him right. He was never good enough for me anyway." My hands trembled as I watched, the weight of their betrayal threatening to crush me. But I wouldn't let it. I had the proof I needed to fight back. And I would. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, sitting in Nate's small apartment, the weight of everything I'd uncovered pressed down on me like a tidal wave. The USB drive was more than just a collection of evidence. It was a weapon, one that could expose Clara and Greg for the monsters they truly were. But I knew I had to be strategic. If I acted too quickly or impulsively, I risked losing everything. Nate poured us both a drink, his brow furrowed as he stared at the laptop screen. "This is insane," he muttered, shaking his head. "I mean, I knew Clara had her moments, but this? She's on another level." I took a sip of my drink, the burn of the alcohol grounding me. "It's not just Clara," I said, my voice low. "Greg's just as bad, maybe worse. They've been planning this for who knows how long, using me, stealing from me. And they were going to leave me with nothing." Nate leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "So, what's the move? You've got the evidence. Now what?" I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The files were a goldmine, but they were also overwhelming. There were so many angles to consider: legal, financial, personal. If I wanted to take them down, I needed to cover all my bases. The first step was to secure my assets. I couldn't let Clara or Greg get their hands on anything else. With Nate's help, I logged into my bank accounts and started transferring money into a new account I'd set up under my name alone. It wasn't much. Clara had already drained most of our savings, but it was enough to give me a fighting chance. Next, I contacted a lawyer. Nate recommended someone he knew, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Rebecca Hughes. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning, and I spent the rest of the night combing through the USB drive, organizing the files into categories: financial fraud, infidelity, conspiracy. By the time I finished, the sun was starting to rise, and my anger had crystallized into resolve. Rebecca's office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through me. "Ryan," she said, motioning for me to sit. "Nate told me a bit about your situation. Let's get right to it. What do you have?" I handed her the USB drive, my hands shaking slightly. "Everything. Emails, financial records, even videos. They've been stealing from me, lying to me, and planning to sell my house out from under me." Rebecca plugged the drive into her computer and began scrolling through the files, her expression growing darker with each click. "This is damning," she said finally, looking up at me. "If even half of this holds up in court, Clara and Greg are in serious trouble." I nodded, my jaw clenched. "I don't want them to just get away with this. I want them to pay." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "We have a few options. First, we file for divorce and ensure Clara gets nothing, not a penny. Given the evidence, that shouldn't be hard. Second, we report the financial fraud to the authorities. That could lead to criminal charges for both of them. And third," she paused, her lips curling into a small, satisfied smile, "we make sure everyone in your circle knows exactly what they've done." Her words sent a thrill through me. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Clara and Greg had tried to destroy my life, but now I had the chance to turn the tables. That evening, Nate and I started putting the plan into motion. First, we drafted a message to our mutual friends and family, detailing Clara's betrayal and including some of the less incriminating evidence from the USB drive. I didn't want to humiliate myself by airing every dirty detail, but I needed people to know the truth. Once the message was ready, I hesitated. Hitting send felt like crossing a point of no return, but Nate placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder.
"You've got this," he said.
I nodded and clicked the button. The message was out, and there was no taking it back. The fallout was swift. Within hours, my phone was flooded with calls and texts from friends and family, all expressing shock and outrage. Clara's carefully crafted image of the devoted wife was shattered, and Greg's reputation took a hit as well. People who had once admired them now saw them for what they truly were. But that was just the beginning. The next day, Rebecca filed for divorce on my behalf, citing infidelity and financial misconduct. She also contacted the authorities about the embezzlement, providing them with copies of the evidence. It didn't take long for the investigation to gain traction, and soon Clara and Greg were facing questions they couldn't answer. As satisfying as it was to see them squirm, I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed to confront Clara directly, to look her in the eye and make her understand the gravity of what she'd done. Nate tried to talk me out of it, but I was determined. I found her at a coffee shop, sitting alone at a table by the window. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ryan," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" I sat down across from her, my gaze steady. "I wanted to see you, Clara. To hear you explain why you did it." She looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know what to say. How about the truth?" I demanded. "Why did you betray me? Why, Greg? Was it worth it?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "I was unhappy," she whispered. "I felt trapped. And Greg, he made me feel alive again." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Alive? He used you, Clara. Just like you used me." She flinched, her tears spilling over. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "A terrible mistake. But I never meant to hurt you." I leaned forward, my voice cold. "You didn't just hurt me. You tried to ruin me. But guess what, Clara? You failed. And now you're going to pay for it." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the coffee shop, the weight of her betrayal finally starting to lift. The wheels of justice were turning, and Clara and Greg's world was beginning to crumble. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one more card to play, a final move that would ensure they could never hurt anyone else the way they hurt me. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like a small victory, but it wasn't enough. Clara's tears were meaningless to me, empty apologies from someone who had knowingly tried to destroy everything we'd built together. The pain she inflicted was calculated, and I wouldn't stop until the scales were balanced. When I returned to Nate's apartment, he was waiting for me, a beer in hand and a cautious look on his face. "How did it go?" he asked, handing me the drink. "She tried to play the victim," I said, sinking onto the couch. "But I didn't let her. I made it clear she's not getting away with this." Nate nodded approvingly.
"Good.
"So, what's the next moves?" I took a sip of my beer, letting the bitterness roll over my tongue as I considered my options. The legal wheels were already turning, and the investigation into their embezzlement was underway. But I needed to deliver a final blow, something that would not only expose their lies, but ensure they could never rebuild from the ashes. That evening, I went back to the files on the USB drive, combing through every detail. Greg had left a digital trail that painted a damning picture: illicit business dealings, stolen funds, and shady partnerships that extended far beyond his affair with Clara. The man was a walking liability, and it was time to bring his empire crashing down. The next morning, I met with Rebecca to discuss my findings. She listened intently, her sharp eyes scanning the documents I'd printed. "This is solid," she said, tapping the papers with her pen. "If we leak this to the right people, Greg's reputation will be in shreds. But you need to be careful. He's not just a cheater, he's dangerous." I nodded. "That's why I want to do this right. I'm not just out for revenge, Rebecca. I want justice." She gave me a small smile. "You're smarter than most of the clients I deal with. Let's make it happen." We started with an anonymous tip to Greg's business associates, sending them copies of the incriminating emails and financial records. Within hours, the fallout began. Greg's phone must have been ringing off the hook as one by one, his partners distanced themselves from him, publicly denouncing his actions. The media picked up the story soon after, painting Greg as a fraud and a liability. Watching the chaos unfold was satisfying, but I knew Clara wouldn't escape unscathed. Her involvement in the embezzlement meant she was implicated as well, and the court of public opinion was merciless. Friends and acquaintances who had once admired her turned their backs, their support evaporating like smoke. Meanwhile, I prepared for my court date. Rebecca was relentless, building a case that left no room for doubt. When the day arrived, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, my resolve unshakable. Clara sat on the opposite side, her eyes red and swollen, while Greg was conspicuously absent, likely too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. The proceedings were swift. Rebecca presented the evidence with precision, dismantling Clara's defense piece by piece. When it was over, the judge ruled in my favor, granting me full ownership of our shared assets and ensuring Clara received nothing. It was a victory, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my life and my dignity. After the hearing, Clara tried to approach me in the hallway, her voice trembling as she called my name. "Ryan, please. Can we talk?" I stopped but didn't turn to face her. "There's nothing left to say, Clara. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. For everything." I turned to look at her, my expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Goodbye, Clara." With that, I walked away, leaving her standing there, a shell of the person she once was. But Greg wasn't done with me. A few days later, I received a call from Rebecca. "Ryan," she said, her tone serious, "we've been informed that Greg is trying to file a countersuit against you. He's claiming defamation, I laughed bitterly. Defamation? He's the one who cheated and stole from me. Exactly, Rebecca said. And we have the evidence to prove it. But you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly. I wasn't afraid of Greg. If he wanted to go to war, I was ready. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca and I built an airtight defense, using every piece of evidence we had to discredit him. By the time the case went to court, Greg's reputation was already in tatters, and the judge dismissed his claims without a second thought. The final blow came when Greg's shady dealings caught up with him. The authorities had been quietly investigating him for months, and the evidence from the USB drive was the missing puzzle piece they needed. Greg was arrested on charges of fraud and money laundering, his smug demeanor replaced with the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. Clara, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She tried to rebuild, but her past clung to her like a shadow, a constant reminder of the choices she'd made. Every time I thought about her, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. I was free. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, Nate joined me, a beer in hand. "You did it," he said, raising his bottle in a toast. "You took them down." I smiled, clinking my bottle against his. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged. "That's what friends are for. So, what's next for you?" I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. A fresh start. No more lies, no more betrayal. Just peace. As we sat there in companionable silence, I realized that I had finally reclaimed my life. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. With Clara and Greg out of my life, I found myself standing at the edge of a new beginning. It was an unfamiliar, unsettling feeling, being free from their betrayal, but not knowing where to go next. I'd spent so much time fighting for justice that I hadn't thought about what came after. The silence was deafening, but it was also liberating. Nate suggested we celebrate, but I wasn't in the mood for parties or drinks. "I think I just need some time to myself," I told him, and he nodded in understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But don't forget, this is your chance to start over. Make it count." I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and rebuilding my professional reputation after the chaos Clara and Greg had caused. The routine was comforting, giving me a sense of control and purpose. But at night, the quiet crept in, and with it, the memories. I couldn't help but replay everything in my mind: Clara's lies, Greg's smug face, the betrayal that had blindsided me. One evening, I found myself staring at the USB drive again. It was the key to unraveling their schemes, but it was also a painful reminder of what I'd lost. I debated throwing it away, but something stopped me. It wasn't just evidence, it was proof that I'd survived, that I'd fought back and won. About a month after the dust had settled, I received a surprising message. It was from Clara's younger sister, Mia. We'd always gotten along, but she had distanced herself after the divorce, likely out of loyalty to Clara. Her message was simple: "Ryan, can we talk? I need to clear the air." I hesitated before replying, unsure of what she could possibly want to say. But curiosity got the better of me, and we agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. When Mia walked in, she looked nervous, her hands twisting a napkin as she sat across from me. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "For everything Clara did. For not standing up for you." I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to take my side, let alone offer an apology. "You don't owe me an apology, Mia," I said. "You weren't the one who betrayed me." "No, but I didn't stop it either," she insisted. "I knew about Greg, about the money. I should have told you." Her confession was a bittersweet relief. It validated everything I'd suspected, but it also reopened old wounds. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She looked down, her eyes filled with regret. "Clara was my sister. I didn't want to believe she could do something so horrible. But after everything, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Our conversation was cathartic, a chance to finally confront the lingering questions that had haunted me. Mia revealed more about Clara's motives, her resentment, her jealousy, her fear of losing control. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me understand them. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of closure. As we parted ways, Mia offered a small smile. "I hope you find happiness, Ryan. You deserve it." "Thanks," I said, meaning it.
You too?
The weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to feel normal again. I focused on rebuilding not just my career, but also my personal life. I reconnected with old friends, went to the gym, and even took up a new hobby, photography. It was therapeutic, giving me a creative outlet and a reason to explore the world beyond my pain. One day, while wandering through a park with my camera, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Evelyn, and she was chasing her mischievous dog, who had decided to steal a frisbee from another group of parkgoers. I snapped a picture of the chaos, laughing as Evelyn finally caught the dog and turned to apologize to the group. She caught me watching and smiled, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Not my proudest moment," she said, walking over. "It was entertaining," I replied, showing her the photo on my camera. "You've got a future athlete on your hands." She laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Or a future troublemaker." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn and I spent more and more time together. She was a breath of fresh air, kind, witty, and unafraid to be herself. There were no pretenses, no hidden agendas. She was everything Clara wasn't. But as our connection grew, so did my fear. I worried about opening myself up again, about trusting someone after everything I'd been through. Evelyn sensed my hesitation and never pushed, giving me the space I needed to heal. One evening, as we sat on her balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me with a gentle smile. "Ryan, I don't know what you've been through, but I can tell it's been hard. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Her words broke through the walls I'd built around myself, and for the first time in years, I let someone in. As my relationship with Evelyn blossomed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. The shadows of my past began to fade, replaced by a new sense of purpose and hope. Clara and Greg were nothing more than distant memories, their betrayal a painful chapter in a story that was far from over. I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I was looking forward to the journey. And with Evelyn by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. While I was beginning to piece my life back together, Clara's world was falling apart. Word of her betrayal, her involvement with Greg, and the fallout from their scheme had spread far and wide. People who had once admired her turned their backs, and the whispers of judgment were impossible to ignore. It started small, friends distancing themselves, polite conversations turning cold. But soon, the consequences grew. Her job, which she had always prided herself on, was now in jeopardy. The company's higher-ups couldn't ignore her tarnished reputation, especially when the evidence of her involvement with Greg's embezzlement surfaced. Within weeks, Clara was asked to resign quietly, saving the company from further embarrassment. The blow was devastating. Clara's career had been her identity, the one thing she could cling to as proof of her success. Losing it stripped away her sense of self, leaving her adrift in a world that no longer respected or trusted her. Meanwhile, Greg was dealing with his own fallout. The evidence Rebecca and I had gathered was airtight, and as the authorities dug deeper into his financial dealings, the scope of his crimes became clear. Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. Greg was the poster child for corporate corruption. The media had a field day, splashing his name and face across headlines. His partners, once loyal to him, distanced themselves, scrambling to save their own reputations. Lawsuits piled up, and his assets were frozen, leaving him with nowhere to hide. By the time the trial began, Greg was a broken man, his arrogance replaced with desperation. Watching the trial from a distance was surreal. I'd spent months preparing for this moment, but seeing Greg squirm under the weight of his actions was more satisfying than I could have imagined. The judge showed no mercy, handing down a sentence that ensured Greg would spend years behind bars. Justice had been served, and the man who had tried to destroy me was finally paying the price. Clara, however, wasn't as lucky. While she managed to avoid jail time, her involvement in Greg's schemes left her financially and socially ruined. The life she had built, the image she had carefully crafted, was gone. She moved out of our old neighborhood, unable to face the judgment of those who knew her story. Her family, once supportive, grew distant, ashamed of her actions and unwilling to offer more than cursory assistance. One day, I received an unexpected call from Clara. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Ryan," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can we meet? Please, just for a moment. I need to talk to you." I considered hanging up, but decided to hear her out. We met at a small cafe, a neutral ground where neither of us could make a scene. When she walked in, she looked nothing like the woman I once knew. Her confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a defeated posture and hollow eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting down across from me. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I had to see you." I didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. "I just wanted to apologize," she said, her voice cracking. "For everything. For lying, for cheating, for betraying you. I ruined us, and I have to live with that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. But I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt nothing. "I appreciate your apology," I said, my tone even. "But it doesn't change anything, Clara. What's done is done." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "I know. I wanted you to know that I regret it. Every day. And I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday." Forgiveness. The word felt foreign, almost laughable. But as I looked at her, a shell of the person she once was, I realized that holding on to anger wouldn't change the past. It would only keep me tethered to a pain I no longer wanted to carry. "I'll try," I said finally, standing up. "Take care of yourself, Clara." And with that, I walked away, leaving her and the ghosts of our past behind. As for Greg, his fall from grace was complete. The last I heard, he was serving his sentence in a federal prison, far removed from the life of luxury he once flaunted. His name was a cautionary tale, a reminder that greed and arrogance always catch up with you in the end. In the months that followed, I found solace in the simple things. Late-night walks, photography, and quiet evenings with Evelyn became my new normal. She was a beacon of light in the darkness, her presence grounding me and reminding me of the good still left in the world. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, Evelyn turned to me with a curious look. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked softly. "Clara and Greg?" I hesitated, considering her question. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the way you'd think. I don't miss them or feel anger anymore. I just wonder how things got so twisted. How people I once trusted could do something so cruel." Evelyn nodded, her hand finding mine. "It's hard to make sense of betrayal."
"But you've come so far, Ryan."
"You didn't let it break you." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time, I truly believed them. I had survived the storm, faced the darkness, and emerged stronger. The scars were still there, but they were a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I could overcome anything. The life I'd built with Evelyn was a testament to second chances. She taught me that love could be pure, untainted by lies and manipulation. With her, I found not just happiness but peace, a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I was missing. As we sat there, watching the last rays of sunlight fade, I realized that the past no longer held power over me. Clara and Greg were chapters in a story I'd finished reading. Now, it was time to write a new one, filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. The weight of the past had finally lifted. The tangled mess of betrayal, revenge, and heartbreak that had consumed my life was no longer the center of my world. I had fought my battles, sought justice, and closed the door on the people who had tried to destroy me. Now it was time to move forward. Evelyn and I began carving out a life together. It wasn't easy at first. Trust was something I had to relearn, and Evelyn was patient as I navigated my fears. She understood that the wounds Clara and Greg had left would take time to heal, and she never rushed me. Instead, she stood by my side, a steady presence that anchored me in the present. One evening, as we were cooking dinner together, Evelyn turned to me with a smile. "You know," she said, stirring the pot of pasta sauce, "I think we should take a trip."
Get out of the city for a while.
"What do you think?" The idea caught me off guard. "A trip? Where to?" "Anywhere," she said with a shrug. "The mountains, the beach, a small town we've never been to. Just somewhere new. I think it would be good for us." I thought about it, the idea growing more appealing by the second. A chance to escape, to leave behind the shadows of the past and embrace the future. "Let's do it," I said, grinning. "Pick a place and we'll go." We ended up choosing a cabin in the mountains, a secluded spot surrounded by towering trees and crystal-clear streams. The air was crisp and clean, the kind that made you feel alive with every breath. Evelyn and I spent our days hiking, exploring, and talking about everything and nothing. It was the kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. One afternoon, as we sat by the fire, Evelyn pulled out a small journal. "I've been keeping this for a while," she admitted, handing it to me. "It's for you." I opened it, surprised to find pages filled with her handwriting. She had documented our journey, our conversations, the moments we laughed, the times I opened up about my past. It was raw, honest, and deeply moving. "I wanted you to see how far you've come," she said softly. "To remind you that you're not defined by what happened to you. You're so much more than that." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I felt tears welling up. "Thank you," I whispered, pulling her into a hug. "You have no idea what this means to me." The trip was a turning point, a chance to let go of the last remnants of pain and fully embrace the life I was building with Evelyn. When we returned home, I felt lighter, more at peace with myself and the world around me. One evening, as we were unpacking, Evelyn looked at me with a curious expression. "Have you thought about reaching out to Clara?" she asked. The question surprised me. "Why would I do that?" "I don't mean to reconcile or anything," she clarified. "But maybe to let her know you've moved on. To show her that she doesn't hold any power over you anymore." I considered her words. It wasn't about Clara, it was about me. About taking control of my narrative and proving to myself that I was truly free. "Maybe," I said finally. "I'll think about it." In the end, I didn't reach out to Clara. I didn't need to. My actions, my happiness, and my new life with Evelyn were enough to show that I had moved on. She was a part of my past, a lesson I had learned and left behind. Greg's fate, on the other hand, was something I followed closely. His sentence had been handed down, and the media had moved on to the next scandal. But every now and then, I would see a mention of him, a reminder of the man who had tried to destroy me and failed. As the months turned into years, Evelyn and I grew closer, building a life filled with love, laughter, and endless adventures. We traveled, started a small business together, and even adopted a dog, a mischievous Labrador we named Max. He became the heart of our little family, his boundless energy and goofy antics a constant source of joy. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching Max chase fireflies, Evelyn turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about writing your story?" she asked. "Writing it?" I repeated, surprised. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger. I think your story could inspire people. Show them that it's possible to overcome even the darkest moments." The idea intrigued me. Writing had always been a hobby, but I never considered sharing my personal journey. "Maybe," I said, mulling it over. "I'll think about it." In the weeks that followed, I began jotting down notes, piecing together the events that had shaped my life. It was a cathartic process, one that allowed me to reflect on how far I'd come. With Evelyn's encouragement, I turned those notes into a manuscript, a story of betrayal, resilience, and redemption. When the book was finally published, I was overwhelmed by the response. Readers reached out to share their own stories of overcoming adversity, thanking me for giving them hope. It was humbling and deeply fulfilling, a reminder that even the darkest experiences can lead to something beautiful. As I stood at a book signing one evening, surrounded by people who had connected with my story, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Evelyn, for the lessons I'd learned, and for the strength I'd discovered within myself. Life wasn't perfect, no one's is, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I was truly happy.